Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name's Councillor Chris Rigby and I'll be chairing this meeting this evening. First item on the agenda is just some housekeeping. So Rebecca, can you just take us through that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by the way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the car park at the front of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can we move straight on to apologies?
Yes, we've received apologies from Councillor Anne-Marie Moriarty and Councillor Joe Clements, and we have no substitute members.
Okay, brilliant. So that's 1 and 2 taken care of. Item 3 is any declarations of interest from any of the councillors in the room on the committee. I've got a non-pecuniary one myself. We're looking at the Climate Action Annual Report, and throughout that is community energy is mentioned, and my full-time job is working for a community energy cooperative, but we don't do any work in association with BCP, so it's just for transparency. And then number 4, minutes of the last meeting. Can we approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 19th of November? Looks like consensus. Yep, brilliant. Thank you very much. And we can move straight on to item number 5, which is a new item, which is our recommendation tracker. And I'm just going to introduce Lindsay. If you can introduce this to us and let us know what it is, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a very quick introduction so that you know what the purposes of this is. It's a new document that will be included on each ONS agenda. As you know, when you make recommendations, there's a duty for Cabinet to respond to you, but they have up to 2 months to do that with recommendations. So sometimes the outcome and their response can get a bit lost amongst your other work. So this aims to tighten up that process, put all your recommendations into one place. And you'll note if you look at the document that all the ONS committees and all their recommendations are on there. So I wouldn't intend that you look at all of them, but it does give you a comparison and something you can look across if you want to. So for today, page 30 onwards on the Modern Gov app has the EMP recommendations for the last municipal year. If you scan down, you'll see that where the recommendations have gone to Cabinet, we've included what the response is, where we've got a written response and coded whether they've been accepted or rejected, etc. If you've had a response from a recommendation since the last meeting, we'll include it there. So at item 49 on page 31, you've had some feedback on the safe accommodation work you did. That's come in since the last meeting, so that's now included for you to review. But just to say that the main purpose of the document isn't really just for you to be able to look at whether your recommendations have been accepted, but I think you can bring value by asking for some updates periodically on those recommendations to see how well they're being implemented. So are there any blockers? Are things progressing where you've asked for something to happen and it's been accepted that it will? Is there any more work for you to do to push that forward? That's a sort of accepted, valuable role for scrutiny. And I think by giving you this document, you could probably strengthen that element of your role a little bit. I wouldn't suggest that you do that all the time, perhaps 1 or 2 slots throughout the year to monitor your recommendations and identify some people to ask into committee to ask for implementation updates. And the other thing you'll note is there's a section for actions. This is where you've got anything separate from recommendations, such as you've just asked for some information back from officers. If you want to start using that as a record to help you as a committee, you can do. Some committees do, and yours hasn't historically, but that's there as well for you. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any comments or questions from anyone on the committee? It doesn't look like it. I'll just say this is really useful. I think it gives us a bit of work to do, and probably me as well, to go away and seek some of these updates that are there. It's nice to have it in one place rather than jotted down. I noticed the first one on here, which is unknown seek update, is from the Climate Action Annual Report 23-24. So it's quite nice that we can look for an update tonight, which is pretty useful. So I'll take on some actions from this to follow up on this. And if the committee can come to me with any follow-up they'd like to be done as well on any of the items which are outstanding or wanted to take that on themselves, just let me know. Thank you. But yeah, if that's it, Lindsay, anything else you want to add to it? No, cool. Okay, great. Thanks very much. In that case, we can go on to item number 6, which is recommendations from portfolio holders, cabinet or council. If the committee is okay to agree to move this item into our work plan, so I think it sits a little bit better there. There's just one issue which has come on from that from the last council, which was around flooding, but if we can take that in item 10, if everyone's happy with that. Look around. Yep, perfect. Which brings us on to public issues. Rebecca, any tonight?
There are no public issues, Chair.
Brilliant. And in which case, in possibly record time, flying through to the meat of the agenda. Item number 8 is the Climate Action Annual Report, which we see every year. So for this year's update, it is Councillor Hadley joins us to introduce this paper. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so you have before you an overview paper and the report itself. And I think there has been good progress towards the targets: 21% reduction in our own footprint, and 18% reduction in the area footprint. It's always difficult when we're producing these reports in terms of timing, because we've moved on from the end of the financial year that this applies to, but also the information that comes down from government, which particularly applies to our area targets, is often an 18-month, 2-year time lag. So that's generally from the year before. So it is a bit behind. So we've tried in the report to cover that. I thought it was really important to highlight some of the challenges. So on the actual report, the front cover is a picture of the flooding at Iford. And this winter has been particularly difficult, but actually that flood was the same day as the year before, when the same caravan park was also evacuated, and the frequency of these events is increasing. I found some information from the Met Office in terms of their assessment, which I thought was relevant to have in the report, which highlights the challenges that are growing in terms of wetter winters and heat waves and heath fires in the summertime, and that is a trend that's increasing, and it is directly, unfortunately, because we've not acted quickly enough. There's also a really interesting report, which again I referenced, I think, in my introduction, from government, talking about nature security assessment on global biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and national security. And I'd really recommend it. It's not a long document, but it does highlight just actually how interconnected things are, and how much the changing climate is going to impact life in the UK in ways that people might not have thought about, but government are thinking seriously about. We looked at progress on key areas, and again we've tried. The team have done what we can to highlight some of the projects that have been moving forward, and as I said, trying to think back to when they actually were, to make sure they were within the year that we're looking at, and also trying to highlight in the graph. So at page 82 of your report, there's I forgot what these sorts of diagrams are, but there's a picture which shows the breakdown of where our carbon footprint sits by part of the council, and it shows very clearly that our housing stock, BCP housing stock in both Bournemouth and in Poole, is the biggest part of our footprint by some way, followed by the use of gas and the use of electricity. And so those are areas that there's been a concentration on, and it's good that on housing as part of our leased out buildings, there's been a 16.2% decrease in use of carbon, and that's a lot of work, particularly in the Bournemouth area. Actually, Poole had been dropping reasonably well. Bournemouth seems to have taken a significant decrease very recently, and that's really good to see. There's been a really modest decrease in in natural gas, it's actually up on last year, which is unfortunate, but that's something we need to keep working on. And there's been a significant decrease in fuel, which is really because as at one point during the year, the price of HVO went down quite significantly, and our fleet manager is keeping his eye very much on the ball in terms of that, and so he was able to buy a load of HVO fuel while it was cheap, and because that can just be dropped into the tanks in place of conventional diesel, was able to make use of that. So that's why that number has decreased, and also we have increased our electric vehicles within the fleet. So those two things have made a difference. Overall, there's a graph on page 85, which highlights we set a sort of plan in terms of where we expected to be over coming years, and then we've got dotted lines now which show the trajectory over the last year. And we anticipated the use of electricity would increase because switch away from gas and use of heat pumps, and because of switch away from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. That hasn't actually happened. We have increased the vehicle fleet. We perhaps haven't moved away from use of gas as much as we'd expected, so that hasn't decreased, but fuel has. Area wide, we've been doing quite a bit of work with key partners, with a number of the private and public sector organisations around the area. And that's about sharing and listening as much as telling them what we're up to, and sharing our grief and supporting each other in terms of the measures that we're taking and listening. So we've had a number of successful events. We're trying to do that quarterly with them, and also to expand the number of organisations that come along. And every time we run them, there's more people wanting to be there, which is great to see. Again, just in terms of the area wide, and as I said, the numbers that come to us come down from back from national figures, and so there is some estimation there, and there's also a significant time lag. But I thought there were a couple of things that I found which I thought were really quite interesting. One was on page 90 of your pack, is information from the MCS, which is the microgeneration scheme certification, which shows the number of installations of solar panels, solar PV panels, the number of air source heat pumps, and the number of battery storage devices. And the really interesting figure there for me actually is the battery storage, which has really risen from nowhere since 2023. And there's an increasing number of not just households, some of them are commercial, some of them are households, but people who are making use of that. And the benefit of that is to be able to ability to shift demand. Particularly, you can save quite a bit of money if you're getting energy from the grid at night and using it at the peak, and not buying electricity at the peak if you're on a tariff that allows you to do that, and some are. But that was an interesting trend. The other really interesting piece I thought in terms of transport, and this is on the next page, so on page 91 of your pack, is the registration of vehicles in BCP. And it seems that the number of electric vehicles that were registered. This is vehicles that were still registered in 2025, and the number of EV and hybrid vehicles has now overtaken the number of petrol and diesel vehicles. All the numbers to the left are the old vehicles that are still in use at that time. So I thought that might be interesting for you to see, because we hear an awful lot of people either saying it's rubbish, no one's buying, or no one's switching. Well, it kind of appears from the data that they are. We've been doing quite a bit of work around a framework for solar PV purchase, for creating a climate vulnerability tool, which is looking at particularly those households, not just our stock, but obviously privately rented or owned households that are vulnerable, or potentially vulnerable to either to flooding or to heat or to those sort of things. That's work that's still underway. We've also got a heat network study underway. The hospitals, the University Hospitals Dorset, are very keen to go forward with a geothermal solution for their own use, but also to work with others. And we've been very keen to work with them and to support that work, and to see how that might form the hub of wider district heating systems within BCP. And so we've got a study looking at where those are most likely to be fertile to do. Obviously, they're looking at the primary acute sites at Poole and at Bournemouth Royal Bournemouth Hospital, but the centre of Bournemouth is the other significant location that we would like to see considered going forward. So that's a swift summary of the report for you, Chair, if that's helpful.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll look to the committee first of all, if you want to start with any questions. Councillor Gillett.
So, looking at the report, it's sort of targeting the sort of the total emissions, and just trying to understand that in terms of obviously the reduction, and the targets are based around the reduction of total emissions. But obviously, if someone was a cynic and they were like, right, I want to get rid of 15% of the emissions on this, because it's not. I think generally things tend to be like EPC rated, don't they? Because it's not EPC rated, you could go, right, I'm just going to get rid of a third of the Bournemouth council houses, yeah, and then you would actually kind of hit that target. I know that you're, elsewhere you're hitting EPC levels as well, but I just sort of it's just sort of the choice as why you went for the total emissions as opposed to sort of looking at I guess what the industry kind of standard of ratings.
Okay, thank you. The portfolio holder for housing is sitting behind me, and then could probably help you with that. But we set a target for our own properties, which we have some control over. Obviously, that's down to the tenants how they use their properties as well. But we set a target for the fabric to be EPC C standard, and when I looked at the data. There are some of our really older properties. A place called Bethany House in Boscombe that is a Victorian building, which is actually really difficult to get some of the flats within that to that level. But generally, we're doing pretty well on that. If you look at the privately rented stock, then there's a lot which are not at EPCC, and there's a lot at G&H, which means they're really leaky buildings. And I think that's a real challenge. So we do some work with Bridgewater as an organisation who will support people who can afford perhaps to do the journey themselves and don't know where to go. And I think there's something about how we can engage with the public to help them on that journey. But we don't control it. And I think that is the challenge with the area-wide targets. The best we can do is to advise people, guide them, support them. But actually, it's down to people making investment decisions of their own.
Very briefly follow that. In terms of when you're looking at the when you're looking, if the government suddenly said, right, we're going to double the number of council houses, yeah, then you're going to miss your target, because even if you get rid of 75% of their emissions, you're still going to be you're still not going to have the reduction in total tonnage of CO2.
So I suppose it depends on how we double the number of the stock, because one of the things, and again I'm stealing Councillor Wilson's thunder really on this, but where we're putting in new properties, we are building to a high thermal standard. We're trying to build them to passive house standard where we can. So new housing stock will be at a good standard. If we take on a whole lot of old stock from somewhere else, then yes, we would take on a legacy from out somewhere else. And one of the challenges with our figures in terms of our internal footprint is, for example, we've taken on the leisure centres that were previously external, and they now become part of our footprint because they're internal. So as not just housing, but any part of the function of the council moves internal, that now becomes part of our footprint, and therefore ours. So it varies the baseline. I think that's part of why we work from a 2019 baseline as a fixed point in time, but within whether we've gone up or down, it's not just whether we got better on properties, it's also about the volume of properties. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I did pre-warn Councillor Wilson before that we might want to talk about housing a little bit in this item, so I don't know if you want to join us now. I'm probably building on that as well, just to go into it and not making it a huge question for you, but the biggest question there is. On page 82 of our pack, there's a really nice blocky diagram that shows the total emission mix across BCP Council. And the two biggest blocks is Bournemouth Council Housing and Poole Council Housing, taking up about half of the emissions. So what's the plan?
Thank you, Councillor Ruki. It's always nice to get a bit of a warning. I think initially, actually, when the climate emergency and all this type of reporting was first started, I don't think it actually was including council housing, but that's been brought in over time, and I think it's quite important that it has been, because I think it should be an area of focus for both the council and ourselves at BCP Homes to try and reduce carbon emissions. So I suppose the first part of the plan is something that we voted on last night. It's the HRA budget, which has, and the 30-year business plan that we put through cabinet at the back end of last year, that has enabled a lot of investment. Firstly, the investment of £11 million going to improve our homes and bringing them up to EPCC by 2030. Now we have to do that anyway because it's a government requirement. But then further to that, we're going to invest another £70 million over the next 20 years from 2030 into improving and reducing our carbon emissions. And what that looks like still needs to go through all the detail. But there's a lot of investment there planned for the future. I think as well, another thing we're doing is we're having really close conversations with Andy's team, the climate team, and we're bringing forward a decarbonisation strategy at the end of this year, early next year. You know, these things can sometimes the timescales can slip, but that's going to be really important going forward in terms of what we do. In terms of the technical stuff, you know, we're always looking to do a fabric first approach. I think Andy already mentioned around some of the PV stuff. We're looking at increasing the number of solar panels, but also that battery storage that Andy was talking about to get the best use out of it. What else? There is something else I'm forgetting. Come back to me if you want. Actually, no, another thing, sorry. From, you know, April 26, so 3 months, we're installing triple glazing in all of, you know, when we're replacing windows, it's going to be triple glazing instead of double glazing. So again, small, seems like a small change, but it will make a big difference.
Thank you. And you spoke about the triple glazing and the fabric and things like that, and solar PV, heat pumps as well. Will they be replacing gas boilers and existing ones as they reach the end of their life?
I think it's on a case-by-case basis, and I think that's going to be part of the decarbonisation strategy going forward, that conversation, you know, talking to... so fortunately for this, we had a really good celebration event on like away day type BCP Homes thing on Monday to celebrate our C1. And within that, I was on the table with our head of client services who deals with a lot of this. And he was explaining that, you know, heat source pumps aren't always the solution. You know, it has to be on a kind of case by case basis, and there are other ways of trying to improve that. So I wouldn't like to kind of commit us to sticking heat source pumps in every single home, but certainly they're part of the solution, but not necessarily the whole solution.
Councillor Hadley.
Well, as I mentioned, district heating is something that I think we need to look at, and again, that may be a better option in some areas. I think some of this we do need to challenge ourselves in terms of getting off gas. You know, that's part of the government's plan and part of what we need to be preparing for. And so some of that is about, well, actually, it's about domestic water in particular, getting the right temperature for that. But there are heat pump solutions that will do that, but also district heating solutions is another good way of doing decarbonisation at scale.
Thank you. Councillor Biddle.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a point while the two of you together. It was just that I have a particular, it's slightly off tangent, but I have a particular interest in Constitution Hill and the building there. And I have been, I had several residents talking to me about that, but we'll save that for another day. But while we were at the displays and one thing or another, we were talking to people. And when we use outside suppliers, I would just like to make the point that sometimes they're not entirely au fait with what we're proposing. So in other words, we had an occasion to say, what's happening with solar panels? And somebody said, we didn't think about that. Are we having batteries? We didn't think about that. And so it went on. So there are issues that I think you need to be, if I may say, you need to be fairly careful about, because especially given what Andy Hadley's just said.
Can I? Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and I think I don't know what conversations have been had. I obviously wasn't there, but I think, in particularly with that development, it's very very early indicative stages. So I think that will all be considered as we go further on into that development. I know that within our HRA business plan, our 30-year one, all of the new developments have been costed with environmentally high standards considered, kind of thing, in terms of the modelling. So yeah, I think that would probably be my answer to that one. Thank you.
I just wanted to, could I seek clarification? There was item 6 on page, I think it was 62, reference the behaviour of tenants. And could you expand on that, given that the and their behavioural patterns, I'm assuming that's what you mean, but given that is 61% of the emissions, and what it is that happens with them that enables us not to make changes. And as a sort of follow-up to that is, do we change the lease on houses that we lease to people so that when there's a follow-up, we can update if they don't want to change from gas, for example, to heat pumps? Then would it be a situation where if there was a new lease, then they would automatically, we would put heat pumps in? Does that make sense?
I think what you're asking is if someone didn't want a particular technology in their building that they're leasing off us, is there a route that we can take to be able to avoid that happening?
So I was just going to explain what was in the report, and then let Councillor Wilson pick up the issue about dealing with tenants.
Sounds good.
So I think, you know, the item 6 within this is because they're leased out and because effectively there are tenants, how hot they heat their building is up to them. You know, they have controls to be able to do what they want to with it. So in terms of the energy efficiency, it's far part of our footprint, but we're not in control of how they do it. So we can give them the heating solution that we hope will be right. We can do a fabric first approach and replace their windows with triple glazed windows. But if they want to have a sauna in there, then that's really their choice.
Yeah, again, I suppose just in terms of the tenant behaviour, it's difficult to control people's behaviours just generally, like simple things like leaving the lights on when you leave a room and things like that. We don't have control over that. In terms of the lease situation, I don't think so. I don't think we have that in there. I'd have to defer to officers on that one because I don't know, but I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've got Councillor Wilson. Anything else on housing at the moment, or can we let him catch his breath before the next item? Thanks. Okay. I think, can I just go back to the top of the report on the baseline that we're now at 20.9% from 2019. Last year, we were on 8.7%, so that's a really good decrease in the total emissions. But I did some quick maths, and assuming the same trajectory of the same savings year on year, that'd get us to about 70% of our total emissions. So how are we accelerating year on year? Because obviously there's been a big acceleration between this year and last. Are we going to continue on that same trajectory?
So I think that's a really good question, and partly that was why we set targets. So in the graph, I'm just trying to find it to bring it to your attention, but we highlighted that there are some choice points really for us in terms of how we get anywhere near the target, and it's the bottom of page 85 of your pack. That effectively we know from, for example, with fuel, we know that if we were to procure HVO fuel, then we could drop our emissions for fuel by 90%. But there is a price premium for that, and we know that's about £500,000 a year because HVO is more expensive than diesel. Interestingly, most of our fleet is working on diesel rather than petrol. So as I said, our fleet manager is very actively watching the market in terms of that. That would be an interim solution anyway, because there is still a carbon footprint to that. Dorset Council have taken the hit. They have decided to switch their fleet over to HVO, and that is by paying more money every year for that. Where we really want to get to is electric vehicles. We've done that where we can for the smaller vehicles, and they are more economic over their lifetime than the diesel equivalent. The larger vehicles are not. The waste refuse vehicles and big lorries are not. At the moment, the economics of it doesn't stack up. But more importantly, because we've got 2 inadequate depots, we haven't got the physical space and the electrical connections to be able to convert everything over to electric. And there's a big upfront cost to doing that. So we know the journey we need to take. There are some choices for us as a council in terms of how we get there, and some of those are going to cost us money. Similarly, if we look at the gas, as we've said, moving over to a big time away from gas would mean taking out boilers, putting in heat pumps, and doing various other things to do that. At what point do we invest to make that happen? And with electricity, we are looking at a procurement of effectively. For a little while, our footprint on electricity went shooting down because we bought green electricity, but it was just buying the obligations off of the big 6, so it wasn't actually properly green energy. We are looking at the potential for trying to buy energy directly from a green supplier, and that would eliminate the carbon element of that. It would be mostly locally produced solar. So there are strategies, and part of what we need to do in the next year really is to look at exactly make the cases for those things. I think one of the key things we did as part of our local area energy plan, which we launched this year, was to highlight that there is not a zero cost for staying still, and actually the cost of not doing these things is almost as much as it is doing them in different ways. But we need on a case by case basis, effectively, to produce the business case to highlight the change that it will create, both financially and from a climate footprint perspective. And that's what that graph attempted to do, was to lay out how we make those choices. We are moving in the right direction, but not fast enough.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton Gibbs.
Since you mentioned the cost of doing nothing, it was one of the things I'd made a note about. We've said about 5.3 billion or 5.8 billion. I'm just interested in the what you're including in the cost of not doing anything.
If I may, I don't know if my climate lead would be able to help me there, because she commissioned the work with on that. Could you come and give me a hand on that?
Thank you, Gail. Welcome.
Yes, I was interested in the cost of, in paragraph 21 of the report, I was interested in the comparison of the cost of doing something and the cost of doing nothing. Yeah. We're saying that, I think we say it costs slightly more than the cost of doing nothing. But I'm deeply concerned that even if we do spend the 5.8, depending on how you've calculated the 5.3, if it's about changes as a result of climate change, us spending 5.8 is not going to stop climate change. We may be doing our contribution, but it doesn't mean to say we won't still get flooding and climate warming, because we've got the rest of the planet to consider. BCP is not an isolated case.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot to do with, because what we've not factored in either is the forecast of where energy prices are likely to go. So we know that has been sort of a massive increase over the last 5 years. So you'll have all seen it in your own bills at home. So it's almost looking at some of those costs and those forecasts of the fact of it's not going to stand still. So unless we do improvements, unless we can sort of stabilise and we can put in the projects, we can put in the improvements that we need, then we're going to see rise in costs, and we don't know, and we haven't got a crystal ball, so we don't quite know where those costs are going to go. So I think there's lots of factors that we need to consider. We did some detailed work in the LEAP, under the LEAP study, and City Science actually worked with some of the sort of national stats around this to look at the differences of making improvements and not doing improvements. And that's basically where that figure of the 5.3 came from, was based on national data that we could get hold of at that at that time and what we've got in our existing pipeline. Because actually in our existing pipeline, as Councillor Ridley said, that we're not going to hit our target. So, you know, there is a cost to that. I'm not sure whether that explains it, but
Yeah, I think it's more, for example, you've mentioned energy prices.
yeah,
I would not be convinced whether the whole over 5 billion is savings in energy prices if we do this work. I was just trying to understand whether these are what I'll call savings the council make, or whether these are what I'll call mitigation against the cost of climate change, which we can't actually control ourselves. And that's all I was trying to understand. In other words, are we going to be able to, I'll use the word bank these savings, or if you include scope 3, I'm not even sure whether that figure includes scope 3 emissions, which would, by and large, as we've seen, been largely the savings to tenants,
yeah.
not to us. So I was just trying to get more of a handle on how we made that number up. I don't
Yeah,
wish to be disrespectful and say made the number up. What was added in to make that number?
But it's also, I think, you know, the impacts of climate change. So again, there's national stats around the impact of that and what we're going to have to do in heating and cooling our homes going forward. So just that rise in temperature alone is meaning that, you know, in the summer, most people are now sort of trying to cool their homes. You know, they're putting on electrical sort of not fan heaters, cooling systems, etc. You know, that is having an impact. Winter costs, I mean, you'll have noticed this winter, probably the last 2 months of your heating bills, well, you probably haven't got them yet, but that is going to be a massive cost, you know, to most households. So I think, you know, that whole cost of actually not mitigating and not putting some proper controls in place is actually going to increase the amount we're going to spend. It's inevitable.
Thank you. I think that answers my question, that it does include what I'll call climate mitigation. So it's not actually within our control, and we won't see any monetary saving in our bank.
There's lots of factors to it. I think it's not just about the mitigation of climate, but it is also the cost of that energy security. You know, you've got to remember that, you know, as a UK, we import around about sort of 48% of gas. You know, we are held a little bit to ransom over some of these costs. And unless we start to really sort of take some of that control and start generating ourselves and doing more investment, you know, within the UK, then, you know, that's just going to be a rising cost. So I think there's lots of variables that come into play in terms of where that cost actually is identified and where it comes from. But it is climate, it is energy security, and it's the fact that if we don't do these measures, then that is just going to continue on a trajectory of rising.
Staying on with the savings and investment, obviously we've just had the budget yesterday, and I think off the top of my head, last year we were talking about the total cost of this being somewhere around £60+ million to reach our targets, but the climate team having significantly less than that. I think it was closer to 1 million than the 60. What have we been doing to make the most of our resources? Looking at non-capex investment streams, looking at partnerships, looking at how we can build. Obviously, there was the funding round recently from GB Energy, which worked to help local authorities combine with community energy groups or social enterprises to put in bids for funding. Have we been looking at that? Have we been successful in any? Have we got any lined up?
Well, the answer is yes, some. So lots of the GB Energy flow of cash actually is coming down through the hubs. So our hub in our region is the Southwest Net Zero Hub, and they have been quite successful in getting some of that GB money. Hence, our heat network study, for instance, has been funded solely from the Southwest Net Zero Hub. We are looking at solar projects with them at the moment. We're also trying to draw down for retrofit of private sector, predominantly private sector homes, which we know is a massive area. But what we need to do is we need to be almost as a council, we've got to be that funding ready. And I think there's still some stages that we've got to go through. The decarbonisation plan, for instance, you know, we've got to be able to demonstrate that we've done that groundwork. You know, we've done the hard work. We've got a plan. We've got a clear set of actions that we can then take forward. And unless we have that in place, we're going to find it really difficult to work with government to try and draw down some of the funds. So, so I think there's lots we can do. And very much, you know, we've grown the team, the sustainability team this year, in order to be able to do more of that work. But we absolutely need a really healthy pipeline of projects that are ready, funding ready in particular, so that we can actually maximise on how much we can draw in as a local authority. But I do think we are in a good place to be able to do that.
I think you've almost given me my next question to ask of how close are we to having funding ready projects? Because I don't know about you, but I'd rather be spending someone else's money than spending our money. And if we look at what South West Net Zero Hub have got in that latest round of funding and where it's gone to, it's the Cotswolds, Bath, Devon, Broome. Where's BCP? We should be on that list, and hopefully, are we going to be ready for the next round of funding? Have we got those projects coming up?
I don't know why we're not on that list, because they have funded us, so that's a little bit odd. So it may be that, you know, I don't know, but we definitely did get some of that funding. Obviously, you know, heat networks come at a massive cost. You know, you're looking at typically you know, a town centre scheme costing anywhere from 50 to 100 million. That's not to scare anybody in the room. But there are ways of financing those deals, you know, debt finance, in particular, Public Works Loan Board, anything over sort of 50 million starts attracting a different type of investment portfolio. Now, when I say we need to be funding ready, we also need to have strategic finance ready. So we as a council have got to really consider what some of those delivery models are starting to look like. And I think, you know, because it's not only delivery partners, but it's also how we're going to fund each one of those projects. And I think it's a different blend of finance that's going to be required for each element as we go through the LEAP action plan. So I think there's a really big piece of work to do around strategic finance and almost, you know, what's going to be palatable, what's going to be acceptable. How do we bring in community interest parties into that, you know, get community energy involved in some of those blends of finance as well. So I think there's a bigger piece of work to do, particularly this year, around strategic finance and procurement in delivery vehicles.
Thank you. Last question on this topic. Sorry, Councillor Hadley, did you want to come in on that before?
Well, I was just going to say that obviously because obviously on heat networks, because the University Hospital also is really keen to move forward this year and to make a start, and we are working with them in terms of how we might follow on to that. But it does give us a real leg up with getting some real progress on the ground.
Councillor Dalton Gibson, did you want to come in?
Thank you. On page 86, we've got targets for gas, vehicle fuel, electric over the coming years through to 2029, 30. I was just a bit interested that we've got gas at 4.3 all the way down, and in the last year it suddenly drops to 2.2. I'm just saying, you know, if I could use the word slightly sceptically, do we have a plan to make that drop by 50% in that year, and that year specifically? And you see the same, somewhat similar with the vehicle fuel reduction drops 90% at one point, just goes from 3.2 to 0.3 all of a sudden. It just, I would have thought if we were replacing vehicles, we would be replacing them over many years and the fall would have been more gradual.
Yeah, so we have already been replacing the vehicles. We had a 3-year plan and we have got, I think it's 73 currently, but we have, we are already on that journey. I think you're right, and I think, you know, partly that when that was put together and those targets were put together last year, and we said last year that we would, in this current year, we were reviewing those targets. But part of that is we need to make that change between now and 2030 for our internal target, which is national target. So we need to show it in some way. I wasn't that comfortable with it just being a straight line like that, because as you say, it will take multiple years, even if it's done in one go. Those sorts of size of changes don't happen that quickly. So yes, we will be reviewing that, refining it this year.
Okay, I've only got one more question. I'll look around and see if anyone else is, otherwise we can sort of bring this to an end after this. It's just looking at BCP being particularly enabling landlords, and I'm thinking more in a commercial state here. If we've got people who are in long-term leases on our leased out properties and they want to do something like install solar on their own back, whether they go for a PPA solution or they want to fund it privately or any other technologies, what are we doing to be an enabling landlord and make sure that they can have the scope within their contracts or heads of terms which would enable them to do something without BCP having to do it?
So we've been having the conversations with our properties team in terms of how we can do that. I can't say we've got a solution to roll out, but there have been some conversations with some of the tenants in terms of that, who've come to us to say they want to put solar on the roof, but they need security of tenure and they need our permission to do it. So we are trying to, from the climate team, we're trying to support and enable those conversations, and Martin's been out to a few of the sites as part of that work.
And I think just the other point on that is that, you know, we almost flip that as well, because if they don't want to do it, we might want to do it. So, you know, rooftop solar is our one big, item that we should be considering for all roof spaces where possible. So, you know, that if they're not able to do it, either from a capital point of view or a policy point of view, then, you know, we may want to do something on that roof space. So, you know, it's working, I think, with both property and legal to see how we can be that enabler going forward. But yeah, there's definitely benefit in working together on those types of projects.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I'm glad to hear you're doing something on it. I think for the last question, we've got Councillor Rice, who's online.
Thank you. Yes, I was just wondering, particularly with the solar rooftop mentions, about linking in with the local plan and how that's going in terms of new developments. Obviously, that's not the council's emissions, but the council has influence over the local plan. So yes, we'd be really interested to hear about those conversations.
So one of the challenges, we did try and do this previously, where obviously the local plan went to a certain point and didn't and was withdrawn, and the national plan planning framework sets a target, and it's to have a little bit of solar on a roof. I think it's 10 or 20% of total, not meet your requirements. So it'd be great to go further, as some local authorities have done that. That's a conversation we have to have with planning colleagues. Alongside all the other targets, challenges that they need to think about in setting the plan. But certainly sustainability needs to be at the heart of planning for future buildings. They should be fabric first, built to a high quality, and also able to generate as much of the renewable energy as they can on site.
So yeah, do we have capacity within the sustainability team to be having those conversations and drawing up what we would expect to see in the local plan?
I think we've got to have those conversations because, you know, if we're not careful, we're going to be fighting for the same space, particularly where solar is concerned. So, you know, we need to be talking to planning about, you know, how we can try and be an enabler for new development and new conversations with developers about, if they've got a south-facing roof, if they've got a certain orientation, that it's almost, you know, mandated where possible that you know, solar is incorporated. So otherwise we're going to miss that opportunity. You know, we know that actually the cost to retrofit is so much more expensive. If you're going to retrofit a home and try and go in, you know, and insulate after the event, you know, after it's been built, you know, you're looking at a cost of probably, you know, double of trying to do something on new build. So I think we've got a real opportunity. I think we've just got to work with planning colleagues to have some of those conversations and reach a sensible position on this. Because at the moment, you know, building regs, you know, as far as the sustainability team is concerned, don't go far enough. You know, Part L of the building regs just doesn't cut the mustard, and it's not going to get us anywhere closer to a net zero position. So I think there's conversations to take place, and it's almost, you know, what's going to be a sensible approach in the local plan.
Great, that's reassuring to hear. Thank you.
Okay, I've not got any more hands up, so I think it just leaves me to say thank you very much for bringing this paper to us again. I do think in general it is a good news story that where we are this year from where we were last year, it is obviously a marked increase. Would I rather be sitting here having this conversation 3 or 4 years ago at this point? Absolutely. But this committee, I think, is always going to push you harder. Even if you come and said you were 90% there, we'd be saying, well, why aren't you 110% there, you know? So thanks for bringing it to us, and we look forward to having you back next year to see where we are. Obviously, we've got the climate dashboard still online, which anyone can go to and have a look at, and is really, really useful to drill down and interrogate on all the finer details. So thanks very much. There is a recommendation, actually, isn't there? That is just that we note this, if everyone is happy with that. Great, thanks very much. And that brings us on to item number 9, which is the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy from 2076 to 2031. And we've got Kieran joins us, and Kelly, and Fraser and Tim as well. Thank you, come in force. Thanks very much for bringing this, because I know that we did have a conversation that we're not quite there yet with this paper. So we do really appreciate getting to view this earlier draft of it as well, and hopefully giving you some good input on it. So Kieran, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We obviously take environment and place overview and scrutiny very seriously. I've brought my whole squad with me, ready for any questions and queries you might have. Thank you for bringing this to us and allowing us the space to have it scrutinised. And I think it's good that it's coming a bit earlier, actually, in able to kind of add, 9 or 10 more opinions into the mix. So I'm really proud to share the progress we've made across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. Progress that is not only measurable, but deeply human in its impact. Over the past 5 years, our partnership approach has transformed the way we respond to homelessness. We've created more than 275 new support accommodation placements, and some incredibly high quality stuff in that. The Ferryman development in Poole springs to mind, giving people a safe, stable place to rebuild their lives. Our Somewhere Safe to Stay service continues to prevent people slipping into rough sleeping at its hardest moments. But some of the most inspiring progress we made has been in our prevention work. We've seen more than 30% increase in prevention outcomes in the last year alone, keeping significantly more people in their homes and preventing crises before they unfold. We've worked really, really closely with private landlords and have enhanced our relationship to catch those issues early. Services like Let's Talk Renting, youth family support, and enhanced triage have meant that more households than ever have been able to remain in their homes or find suitable alternatives. We've also deepened our integration with health and social care, ensuring a more trauma-informed, person-centred practice. But I think one of the most powerful stories of the past year, and probably one that I've gone on a bit too much about, but we'll do it anyway, has been the dramatic fall in the use of bed and breakfast accommodation. We've reduced the number of families in B&Bs from the point of around 140 families stuck in B&Bs, well over the statutory 6-week limit when I took over the role, to being over a year now, with no family staying in B&B longer than 6 weeks, and just 3 families currently in B&B, and 2 of those were placed just yesterday. So we'll hope that they're out of B&B as soon as possible. Behind each number is a child sleeping in their own room, a place for them to do their homework, a family being able to cook a real meal in a real kitchen, and parents no longer living with the anxiety of those difficult conditions. That's what partnership and strategies achieve. This is not to say we're not aware that there's still more to do. We know there's still families in hostels who are struggling, and that's why this strategy is so important. Our work will never stop until everyone has a safe place to call home. I believe this strategy is bursting at the seams with hope and optimism. It has the foundations of the last strategy, but goes further. More than 500 people helped shape our new strategy, and I will just take a moment to thank Fraser, Rachel, and Paul for all their work on this. I don't think I've known a more thorough consultation process. The amount of events and opportunities to participate has been unbelievable and really, really well attended. Professionals, partners, landlords, young people, and most importantly, those with lived experience. Their voices have guided us towards what matters most. Even earlier intervention, stronger integration with health and wellbeing services, compassionate, consistent support, and very clear communication every step of the way. So, our strategy for the 2026-2031 sets a clear, hopeful direction that homelessness in BCP becomes rare, brief, and unrepeated. Rare because we intervene early, brief because when somebody needs help, they get it quickly and with compassion, and unrepeated because we prioritise long-term stability, strong tenancy support, and real opportunities to thrive. We're also committed to changing the narrative around homelessness, challenging stigma, and building empathy. And we achieve this, I believe, and I think the partnership believes, by keeping lived experience at the heart of everything we do. When I first got the role in 2019, one of the first things I did was head over to Finland to meet the Y Foundation CEO. He was one of the architects behind Finland's world-renowned progress in reducing homelessness. He said to me, and it will always stick to me, that nobody is a lost cause, that all you need is patience and persistence. And as a partnership, I believe we are patient. We know success doesn't come overnight, but that it will come. And I believe we are also persistent. We don't give up on those who are struggling. I believe that homelessness isn't inevitable, that prevention works, and that when we act together, we transform lives. And the results, a significant reduction in B&B use and a hefty rise in prevention success, show that we are already changing lives. But we know we can go further, and we must go further. So I'm very, very happy to present this to your board tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been really interested reading this. Although it's early, it's quite a lot there, and there was more to go through than what I thought there was, so I was really pleased to read it. I did have a conversation with this yesterday with the chair of Adult Health and Social Care over in Scrutiny, and he's just passed a comment to me, so I'm just going to read that out before we get into the debate, if that's all right. He said, I'm a bit concerned this is quite high level and doesn't mention health support. It seems that ensuring we support those with mental health or medical conditions is an essential component of helping people out of homelessness and rough sleeping. And I was going through and I'm inclined to agree that there's not a lot of detail about the health aspect of homelessness and particularly rough sleeping as well. Is there any scope to include that within it?
Absolutely. But I do think there is. I would challenge back that there is a lot of mention of health. You know, I just literally typed in the word to the document, and 134 results have come up for health, which is quite a few. So I would say that we have really thought about health. I know that has been a constant push from both the partnership and partners and organisations. We have lots and lots of good charity partners, such as the Health Bus and the former lead member who's now working there, is always talking to me about this. So I do think there is a lot in there. I will defer to officers to go into a bit more detail around what we're doing with health colleagues, but I would say there is quite a bit in there, and we've really been conscious of that.
So Ben Tomlin, I'm head of strategic housing and partnerships. So I agree. So I think part of the work that we've done around this development of the strategy and where we're at means that the aspirations around delivering some of these new priorities or enhanced priorities will come in the detail of the delivery plan that will be evolved over the next couple of months before Cabinet in May. And within that work will be health colleagues to help shape what will be the contents of what goes in delivery. A couple of things just in terms of practice that happens right now. You mentioned rough sleeping, so every week there is a multidisciplinary team of organisations, including health, social care, housing and voluntary and community sector, that meet on a weekly basis to plan the needs of rough sleepers, to find alternative accommodation, but also to address mental health, substance misuse, physical and other needs from a health perspective, is a really intensive offer and successful offer that has meant that we've been able to drive down rough sleeping for people that have rough slept long term. That's only happened because of the intensive relationships across health and social care that work on a very regular basis. I think that there is really great practice across that for that rough sleeping group, but rough sleeping only constitutes less than 10% of people that are homeless or impacted by homelessness. So when we're thinking about what is going into a delivery plan for this strategy from a health perspective, we have to be thinking about wider groups of people, families, and other single adults that are impacted by homelessness.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't help myself. I have to add my 2 pennies. I think everybody knows me. I'm Kelly Dean. I'm Director of Housing and Public Protection. I just wanted to. It's a really good point that Councillor Canavan raises. I do think we've covered it, and Ben is completely right that it will come in the detail of the delivery plan, which is where we've sort of fallen short with the version that you're seeing. I just wanted to reflect that I feel like there is more of a focus, not just actually from a homelessness perspective, but looking at housing, and back to some of the discussion that we were having earlier around climate, or you guys were having around climate change. From a housing standards perspective, there's far greater connection and partnership discussions than I've ever known in my 30 years in this role. So, not this role, but in it'd be a bit strange if I've been a director for 30 years. Really just positive, healthy discussions across partners and across a system that is, that really needs to consider housing as a wider determinant of health, and how those impacts are related. The other thing I just wanted to mention is a plug for the specialist housing and support strategy, which maps all of our requirements for the first time in a number of years, maps the requirements for specialist housing provision, support, and that is going to be absolutely critical to, first of all, those discussions and opening doors around how we work as a system across health and adult social care and housing, children's as well, really thinking about what our provision looks like, and then unlocking some of the solutions. You're absolutely right about families in bed and breakfast, but we have a number of people, single people and couples, who are locked in bed and breakfast at the moment because it's really difficult to find the right solutions to move them on to. Move on is troublesome. And so, our new strategic plans will start to try to address that. So I think there's something perhaps for us to reflect on in terms of how this all comes together in that wider context and how we communicate that. So I just thank yourself and Councillor Canavan for the comments. Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something as well. I think this is something in terms of health that there has been actually some criticism of the national strategy that it's not helping. The health isn't mentioned enough, but also there's been some criticism of the 10-year health plan by the NHS that only mentions homelessness once in the whole document. So I think there is an issue there, and there is. I'm certainly conscious of there's a number of the commitments that do mention health. I think the detail, as Ben said, will be in the action plan, but we've been having these discussions and also seeking actively to get more health representation with the Homelessness Delivery Board as well, which I think there's now progress with.
Thank you. And I think just to add another element as well, we moved the Housing Directorate into the Health and Wellbeing Corporate Directorate a while back now. But the new Corporate Director for Health and Wellbeing, we've had a few one-to-ones now, and we speak at length about the importance and the interlink between housing and how fundamental it is. So I think that's really, really promising. I think, yeah, I'm hopeful of a lot of progress within this area.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it was just when we had that conversation, it's something that we here tend to look at the place-based side of the strategy rather than the health. So it was quite interesting. What I might do is, once we get to the end of this, there are a couple of recommendations, is make a recommendation to adults ONS to say that they might want to speak to you once the delivery plan's ready, rather than coming back here or going that way, just to put it in different direction, but that'd be a recommendation to them rather than to you. While I'm talking and I can't see any hands, I'll carry on for a second. Oh, go on, Councillor Ricketts. I know you've got not much voice as well.
Not much voice today. With early prevention being so important, are you working with education partners for higher education to get into A-level colleges and things like that, where it might actually stem that these are the kids that might be thinking of leaving home, and so I just wondered if there's any kind of education program that's going on to prevent this, and also to take that kind of stigma away from homelessness as well, because we want to get rid of that as well. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Riggets, and I can only imagine the effort that's taken you to ask that question. So, and it is a really, really important one. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is actually a really good time to mention some of the work that Homewoods have done. So they've been really, really strong in this area in terms of convening partners. So, and out of that, we've kind of led to really, really good connections with particularly the colleges. So yeah, there is like loads of prevention work going on in that space, both in terms of support workers and all sorts. Ben and Fraser and Kelly might be better placed to give you a bit more of the detail, but absolutely, it's something that we're really, really focused on. We've just launched a new youth homelessness board, which again is putting more focus on this area. It's really important that we get lived experience at the heart of that, and I think we've also got a really well-respected independent chair that Homewoods are paying for, that has really high standing in some of the work that they've done in Wales around this area. So yeah, there is lots and lots of promising work. And yeah, it's so important. But it's not just about care leavers. It's also about wider homelessness, and families in B&B is part of that. But it's across the board, and preventing is absolutely spot on. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that, but
So I didn't give my name when I spoke before. I just realised Fraser Nicholson, Homelessness Partnerships Coordinator. And I was just going to pick up on what you said about stigma, and I think that's a really big priority. It's one of the core aims of the new strategy is around changing the narrative around homelessness. So there's all sorts of aspects to that, including how hopefully educating the wider public, but also how we talk about homelessness, even the use of imagery. So, for example, I'll give you an example. So, an organisation called the Centre for Homelessness Impact have an image bank, which all of the images on it are shot with experts by experience from all sorts of backgrounds. And the idea of that is to positive imagery that's strength-based. Often if you read an article in any newspaper about homelessness, there's a particular type of image that you see. We want to stop that. And also it tends to focus on one particular type of homelessness, which is usually rough sleeping. And obviously, as Ben said, that's about 10% of homelessness. So this image bank, which has had some involvement in BCP, we've had several shoots so far, and that includes young people, that includes families, that includes single people, and there's more to come on that. So just to reassure you really that there's a really big emphasis on that, and also helping people understand what causes homelessness, that it isn't people's fault, that there's all sorts of systemic issues that lead to homelessness impacting people.
Just if I may, get well soon, Councillor Ricketts, and also just to emphasise the importance that we've placed and the partnership has placed on the change in the narrative work that we're doing. We have a fully funded by homelessness grant comms officer that works in our team, which is, I think she's been with us for, it's a matter of months, so it's quite early days, but to really pick up on that, driving through the education, awareness, challenging, and really kind of thinking about we have a programme that we've been working on in the last few days to finalise around the Renters' Rights Act and how we communicate with landlords, but also how we educate for residents, and lots of different multi-layered elements of comms with some really dedicated and, I have to say, excellent resource to support not just us but our partners as well. So that's the kind of detail that you eventually will see in the delivery plan, but it's definitely there. You're completely right to raise it.
It would only be appropriate that I have a go as well. I suppose the strategic governance of homelessness and the partnership has the university represented and Bournemouth and Poole College represented. There is a number of different projects that work with for young people. The heads of sixth form are engaged within the information, advice and guidance. So there's a huge amount of offers around young people and their families when there are early identifiers of family breakdown or crisis. So there are services that can engage, but also we recognise that quite a lot of young people that are not in employment, education and or training are more likely to be impacted by homelessness, and therefore identifying those individuals earlier to provide that intervention is really a priority of some of the action planning and some of those interventions and projects.
Thank you. Content with that, Councillor Ricketts? You can just thumbs up, yeah, that's good. I can see why you brought the full team now. I think you've all got your little specialist subject that you want to get in on. Councillor Goodall.
I'm not quite sure if this question is fair enough in the remit of your strategic report, but I did just wonder, with the abolishing of the Section 21 evictions, whether or not you had a spike or anything, because that's due May the 1st, isn't it? So I just wondered if there was a situation report on that.
Well, I'm happy to hand over to Ben, but I think that has. I mean, it's difficult to fully articulate, but there's definitely been a rise in homeless applications and the work that our team has had to do in terms of prevention, and a lot of that is down to Section 21s, but I'll let Ben kind of go more into the detail. But certainly I think that there have been cases of preemptive, before the legislation comes in, use of Section 21 to get tenants that private landlords feel, or just to get the property back because they know it's going to be difficult in the future. But Ben, I don't know if you want
to say I've had a couple of issues myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. And if there's anything you need us to pick up outside of the meeting, happy to.
Yep, so there's definitely been an increase in the last 18 months, certainly, of people, households, families and single people approaching the council because they're losing their accommodation through no fault of their own through a Section 21 notice. And interestingly, we anticipated that, but also thought that it would be far more challenging to access alternative private rented accommodation in order to resolve their homelessness. But interestingly, the market and the availability of private rented accommodation for us to access help for those families has not reduced as significantly as we thought. What we think is happening and what we're seeing more readily are smaller portfolio landlords selling their properties, but they're more often selling their properties to larger portfolio landlords. So the actual property itself is staying in the private rented sector. That's not happening consistently, but it is a contributing factor to us being able to help more families either keep their existing homes, but just through an alternative or different landlord, or find them a new home in the private rented sector. So yes, absolutely an impact, not yet as significant as we might have anticipated.
I'll follow up on that. Just a couple of issues. So, and only because I wasn't clear myself, but will BCP be, as an authority, will we be responsible for maintaining decent home standards, or is that, so that's us, is it? And the other thing was, are we also acting as ombudsman, or is that national?
So in terms of the private renter sector, we have enforcement powers over that when something's not going right. But in terms of issues with social housing, there's a separate independent ombudsman that you would go through in terms of complaints or issues that you would have as a social tenant. That's all.
Kelly.
Sorry, just to follow the pattern. Yes, that's just to expand. So decent home standard for our own stock, which is partly related again to some of the climate work that you guys have been doing and thinking about. And our asset management strategy is going to cabinet in April, which sets out how we look after our stock over the long term. So we have a really good quality stock and good assurance around our performance against on decent homes, and it's one of the key things that the regulator looks for, the regulator of social housing. So, so we're regulated from that perspective, and then thinking about our role as a housing authority from a private sector housing enforcement perspective, we do and will have a role in the legislation as it emerges around new regulations around EPC and decent homes as well. And one of the things we were just discussing in a meeting earlier is, this is all very reflective of a really challenging, particularly looking at Councillor Dorton-Gibson, a very challenging market for private sector landlords. We need to make sure that we achieve the right balance in our role as an enforcing body, but also about education, awareness, training, and making sure there's support. So we've got a far better and far more, I think, improved dialogue with landlords than we've had in the past. And we have just this afternoon been talking about, how we get our kind of organisational tone of voice right in those conversations and make sure that landlords are clear what they can expect from us in terms of how we will pursue those standards, but also how we will support and work with them. So there's a lot of thinking happening around that at the moment, but we will be the enforcing body eventually when that legislation comes in.
Can I just seek some clarification, only because picking up on what you said? So if you've got a situation, for example, where you've got an agent who's handling, say, a block of flats in poor condition, so who do you chase, and do you do that, or does environment, say there's mould in the hall, for example, does environmental health do that, or do you?
It's all comes to all under my scope and my services, and our private sector housing team are sit in public protection alongside environmental health. But it's anything around damp and mould and those sorts of issues in the private sector would be our private sector housing colleagues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. David?
Yes, a couple of comments, questions. I was at an event. I'm busy teaching the Renters' Rights Act across England at the moment, as you can imagine. But I was at an event with a local authority officer who said they were very much looking forward to the Renters' Rights Act. I wasn't surprised by that. I was more surprised by the reason. And the reason was they said that a lot of landlords, of course, evict using Section 21 because there's rent arrears or antisocial behaviour or whatever. And they were looking forward to, because now they were going to have to blame the tenant, they would be intentionally homeless and wouldn't have to rehouse them. And I just wondered, that is going to be something of an issue, because landlords who would have currently written off the arrears and just served Section 21 are going to have to use the arrears as the reason, which of course makes them intentionally homeless and changes the homelessness duties that you have. And I just wondered whether you had, in inverted commas, planned for that.
I'd like to refrain from responding to that. I'm being habitually too honest, so I'll pass to Ben.
We do like honesty, though.
The reason that we don't have a specific plan around that eventuality is because we have a legal duty to assess everybody's homeless application, and we have to look at whether the household did anything or didn't do anything that ultimately led to their homelessness. And when we make an intentionally homeless decision, we found some kind of fault or act or admission that means that we made that decision. When we make that decision, and we don't make those decisions very often, but when we do, and if it affects a house, a family, or an individual, it doesn't really change how we help them. So yes, we don't have a statutory duty to them, but we have a responsibility to that household and families to provide accommodation for them. If we didn't do that, then our colleagues in adult services and children's services would be quickly telling us. So I think our response is, yes, you may be intentionally homeless, but your offer in terms of advice, support and help is the same, and therefore it may be that we will still be making those intentionally homeless decisions, but the impact on the households shouldn't be adverse.
I can't help myself. There shouldn't be blanket policies in place and applied by any housing authority in the individual circumstances of any, even if it's rent arrears, even if it's antisocial behaviour, those circumstances should be appropriately considered.
Fraser?
I would question somebody having that attitude, why they're doing the role, personally.
Thank you, that's really good to hear. Obviously, section 21, I think you've answered that really well, that the housing stock may not change because of the way that it's going to be potentially sold between smaller landlords to larger ones or whatever may happen. One thing which I've noticed when I was going through the report is homelessness in ethnic minorities is increased up to 5 times the census rate compared to non-ethnic minorities. And there's a plan currently in development to move asylum seekers out of hotels into general accommodation. What that looks like, I don't think we quite know yet, but how robust is this strategy on the fact that a number of people could be placed in housing situations which may not be suitable, may not be right, they may end up being homeless through this change? How robust is this strategy in order to offer that assistance to people who may find themselves in that situation?
Fraser, do you want to go in on that, or?
Well, I was going to comment on part of it, just in terms of the generally, people with ethnic minorities are at higher risk of homelessness generally, and that even though in terms of numerically in BCP those numbers are smaller than in other parts of the country, proportionately it's about the same, and that's something that we found doing the background report. So, and that's even before you sort of take into account people leaving like an asylum estate and things like that. That's just generally. So there's definitely, I mean, there's lots of groups of disproportionate risk. That is one of them. So that's just to make that point.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we're as robust as we can be, I'd say, in terms of the strategy. I think what sets us apart from maybe other local authorities is our level of data. So we actually know the issues in terms of, like, you've been able to ask that question because we have really good data on it. So we know where the issues are. So I think it's a really challenging one, as you've raised, but I think we're as robust a place as we can be, I would say. I don't know, Ben, if you want to come in.
Yeah, and I think probably because there isn't perhaps and maybe it is something that in terms of the detail for the delivery plan to consider, but I think one of the reasons why there may be not further narrative in the actual strategy in there is because we have a refugee resettlement team that specialises in supporting BME groups and people leaving the asylum estate and other refugee groups. So that is very successful in resettling communities in the BCP area. So the direct targeted action to support those individuals may be more about community integration and our relationships with some of our commission providers like ICN that do a fantastic job in assisting specific groups to do that from a housing related support perspective, but also from a community cohesion perspective too.
Thank you. Yeah, Fraser, go on.
But finally, really, I think that there is a commitment around supporting people at disproportionate risk, which I've kind of touched on that as one group, but, so that's where with the delivery plan we'll be able to flesh that out. So that that will be people, ethnic minorities. That will be people that are neurodiverse. That will be the LGBTQ+ community, and various other groups as well. So that is in there as but it's not all. You can't have a commitment about every single thing, so that's where the detail will flesh that out.
Yeah, thanks all for that. For me, it's knowing that it's a risk that's put on your radar, really. I know it's a big question and we've got no idea what may or may not happen. It's just something to be aware of. And I think it's from that, it sounds like you are aware of that. Councillor Dalton Gibson.
It's just a comment Ben made earlier. You were saying about how you're finding smaller landlords are selling up and bigger landlords are often buying the properties. I just wondered whether we'd got any planning around the change. There's a new ground, the ground 2 for possession, the mortgage lender ground, but they're changing that, which will make it easier to sell with a tenant in. And I wondered in our early intervention, because really the current position is because a lender has to have the mortgage in place before the tenancy, the tenant always gets kicked out, so you can sell the property. Going forward, that won't be true. You'll be able to have a mortgage after the tenancy's there. So actually, the ability of our early intervention to try and help them sell it without disturbing the tenant, I just wondered whether that was on our radar.
So I would say that it is on our radar because we had a scenario of a case where somebody was actually in a park home and they were being evicted from a park home, and our intervention was to keep the individual within the property through the sale of their park home, and their homelessness was resolved through our mediation, I suppose, and suggestion around that facilitation. We haven't specifically done it in the private rented sector, but I was reassured that the mindset of the team is around keeping people in their homes and thinking about different ways in which to do that, of which that will certainly be one that we'll look at for any tenants that are having to leave their home on that ground.
Just another question. Sorry. I see there's what I'll call a strategic flaw in this change in legislation. In the Housing Act 96, we have a threatened with homelessness within 56 days of expiry of Section 21. And of course, there isn't going to be a Section 21, but they haven't changed the 56 days. They've left that, which to me is madness, that the tenant's going to get 4 months' notice under ground 1. Our obligations kick in at 56 days, and I'm thinking of the poor tenant sitting there worrying about the notice. And I just wondered, you know, again, are we planning towards that? Are we in such a strong position we can start intervening earlier, give ourselves longer to sort it? Or are we still a bit backs to the wall and having to wait until the last minute on that?
I think we look forward to the Code of Guidance updates that government are still due to publish on that particular issue, but also quite a lot of our early intervention work with the private rented sector tenants happens without tenants without notice as much as it does for tenants with notice. When there is something, when there is an issue in a tenancy, where there is a tenancy breach without notice, a landlord or a tenant may contact us, and are doing so increasingly, in order for us to provide an intervention. So it will be interesting to see what the Code of Guidance says about when our statutory duty kicks in, but the early intervention ethos is we do that intervention earlier, whether we need to or not, because we know it will save a tenancy, or more than likely save a tenancy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got 2 questions left. We're getting them for probably doing another 15 minutes on this if there's enough questions. I've got 2, so I'll look around and see if there's any more hands and get you on. Councillor Goodall, get my words out.
I just wanted to say that I had an issue of cuckooing with three elderly people, and you managed to sort it out incredibly quickly, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
If there's no one else, I'll start with one of my questions. Throughout this document, it speaks a lot about lived experience, and clearly there has been a lot of outreach to people with lived experience, which has formulated this strategy, and you can see in the way that it's been developed. But I feel what's missing is I can't hear the voice of people's lived experience throughout it. It's got the forward from within it, and it speaks a lot about the input from people with lived experience. And there's one bit which talks about feedback and storytelling loops and things like that, but you can't see it within the document. It'd be nice to see something there. And I know people may not want to put their face or their name to it, but to have some story through how people have perhaps lived through the system and see that experience built within the document itself? Is that something which could be included, whether it's part of the delivery plan or part of the more high level strategy?
I mean, from my perspective, I think that's a good idea. I would like to to elaborate a little bit more on kind of what you would like to see in terms of that, because that I think is a helpful suggestion. I think lived experience. I don't think the previous strategy had a forward from experts by experience, if I'm not mistaken. Lived experience is something that we're really, really keen to be a golden thread throughout everything we do in homelessness, not just the strategy, but the delivery plan, everything. So I think that's a fair suggestion, and if you've got kind of practical ways of getting that through the strategy without overcomplicating the strategy or diverting from what it is, then yeah, absolutely. I think I would be keen to see that integrated. I don't know if anyone else has opinions on that.
Just to say thank you. I think it's a very valid suggestion. It's one that we need to think about in terms of the comms side of things, and that we do a lot of comms. There's a lot of conversation at the moment about tone of voice and what changing the narrative is the terminology we use all the time. And I think there's something about we've all been at these jobs for a long time, and you end up with a certain way of communicating, writing strategies, and so any feedback such as that and any detail would be really appreciated. And in the long term, the presentation is something that we need to make sure that carries that voice. So thank you for that, and I'm totally happy that we take that away.
Thank you. I'll have a think. I like the way you put it back on me.
No, I'll just add. I mean, it's work in progress, but is going finally on the cusp of actually making progress. So, with the engagement process that we described earlier, actually the very first, there was 36 engagement sessions in total. Several of those were experts by experience groups. And the very first one was, and that was deliberately so, because it was almost like that set the tone. That was a statement of intent. Yes, the final product, if you like, going to call it that. Maybe there's ways that we can make that more clear, but I think it's more like the intention going forward. One of the core aims is all around co-production, and we need to make sure that that's authentic and it isn't just something we're saying we're going to do, that we're actually going to do it and what that actually means. Even the fact that the strategy isn't a council strategy, it's a partnership strategy, which hopefully is clear, and will certainly will be clear by the end. Because there was some, I suppose, in the consultation, some people, it was clear that some people weren't entirely aware of that. So that needs to be clear. But and I think there's a co-production community that's being developed, which will be largely and mostly involving experts by experience from all forms of, from all backgrounds and forms of homelessness. And I think by the time that through the life of this strategy, and by the time we've think about the next one already, but by the time we come to the next one, that will be fully embedded, and that will totally change the way that this work is done going forward. So that the proof will be in the pudding. So.
Sounds good. Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just sort of going back to your point about the asylum estate and sort of mixed in with the Renters' Rights Act. Sort of just want to be quite delicate about this, because obviously I'm not trying to, I know people can get a bit funny, but so I think you're approaching that from the potential of people from the asylum estate becoming homeless or at danger of homelessness. But in such a scenario, and I know we're just talking about what ifs, but if there was kind of lots of incentives given to the private rented sector to house people after the closure of asylum hotels, would you view that as a potential for being more difficult to house people who are not from the asylum estate? Because suddenly a lot of our private rented sector could be taken up. Do you see what I'm getting at? Like, but the incentives would be such that the private rented sector would look to take in people from the hotels, and therefore it creates a shortage in terms of, because so it's kind of like what we felt the Renters' Rights Act might do, but just from another direction, which it just leads to a shortage of housing stock potentially. I mean, it's not in a way, because those people obviously still need to be housed. So I'm not trying to make a moral judgment about who deserves a housing and in what order, but just in a world of incentives, again, I know I've gone back to that again, but in a world of incentives, is that kind of like on your radar as well?
I mean, the short answer is yes. I think when you increase the demand in any kind of thing, if you increase the demand and the supply stays the same, then it's gonna be more challenging. In terms of your incentives point, I think we've had this discussion earlier in the housing strategy, but I think it's not just about incentives; it's about guidance and trying to help private landlords generally, outside of the issue that you're speaking about. But yeah, I don't know, Ben, if you want to come in on that.
I suppose I'd reflect that this isn't a new thing, and the asylum estate within our area has been around for a couple of years. People have been moving out of the asylum estate for a couple of years within BCP. People leaving have been coming to the council and seeking housing assistance. What has not been happening is that lots of, or a majority of those individuals are receiving assistance through private sector landlord incentives to move into the private rented sector, nor are they accessing temporary accommodation in large numbers either, and no more than any other group. So I think, yes, very aware, but in terms of local impact, not seeing that significantly at all with our relationships with private sector landlords and accessing private rented sector, or the assistance that we are offering people leaving the asylum estate.
Sorry, if I could just add another point, is that not everybody who is within the asylum estate currently in our area will choose to stay in the area. People will move to other parts of the country once they settle, and so that there is certainly there are risks and there are issues for us to consider in terms of those factors, but it's not necessarily the case that people remain locally as well.
Can I just ask, are we actually talking slightly at cross purposes? I say that because my understanding would be that when somebody gets their asylum application approved, they will then potentially come to you to seek housing assistance. As long as they're still not yet approved, they're a Home Office responsibility. And I certainly know in London local authorities, the Home Office is paying above market rents, which I think is more your question. Hence why I think there's perhaps two conversations going on. That if the Home Office decided not to use a particular building, shall we say, for asylum seekers who have not yet been approved, they've then said, okay, let's put them all in the private and they'll rent 50 houses in an area. Would that cause you the problem? I think that's the question.
Yeah, and I think probably at the start I did answer like that. Yes, if demand increases and supply doesn't, then yes, that does obviously put pressures on. But equally, we have to meet those pressures, and we need to increase supply. Is the solution for that? Obviously, that doesn't happen overnight, but yeah, I think the short answer is yes.
Thank you. I'm going to look around for any other hands, and if not, I'm going to ask my final question, which is, we didn't mention it, the bed and breakfasts. When I was reading this, the use of bed and breakfasts, that is such a great result. I think, I don't even think I know that that's such a great result. And one of the first things we did on this committee when we came together in this term of election was start to look at the use of bed and breakfast as temporary accommodation. And when we did that, we asked you a question, and it was, what does success look like with that strategy? And you said not having anyone using temporary accommodation for an extended period of time. And you've done that. So I'm going to ask you the same question again with this strategy. What does success look like? And what is the achievable success? Not, oh, it'd be great if we don't see anyone homeless, because we know that's not going to happen with all the best will in the world. What does real success look like over the period of this strategy?
That one for me then. I think, you know, success is a very, very difficult thing to define. I mean, it was good that I was confident in saying that previously. I mean, it's really easy to measure success by numbers in this, you know, in terms of, like, for example, over the last year, we've seen a 16% reduction in rush sleeping because of our count on one specific night being slightly smaller than a count on a night the year before. But things fluctuate, it ebbs and flows. It's really, really hard. Success for me probably comes in the more human stories. You know, I think what I said at the start around persistence and patience, you know, we have some, I mean, I've heard some really, really gorgeous stories, to be honest, of people who have been sleeping on the streets for, entrenched is a word that's often used, for years and years and years. And we've continued to help and try to engage with these people. And after a long, long period, we've managed to get them in homes, we managed to get them a job, we managed to get them back on their feet. That to me is success. Now, obviously, I want the idealistic end homelessness. You know, we don't need a service. But the reality is, I think every person we help is a success. So I would measure it in those kind of human terms, and that's the way I would like to do it. But if you're going to press me and say numbers and such like, it would be trying to reduce rush sleeping as low as possible. It would be maintaining families out of B&B accommodation. It would be getting families out of hostel accommodation for long periods where they're stuck. I think, yeah, there's lots and lots to measure it. I think also actually something we talked about right at the start, that stigma, you know, the attitude towards people who are homeless. I think that really needs to change. I think to be honest, I've seen over the last few months or so, the attitude towards people in social housing needs to change, let alone people who are homeless. So that would also be considered success. It's very, very difficult to define exactly, but yeah, end homelessness. Yeah. Let's get it ended.
You almost went on for a perfect politician's answer before the end statement there, didn't you? Yes, Kelly. Go on.
Only very quickly to say, I'm so proud of the team and the work that we've done, and I feel like I can remember that conversation, and I feel like this is a strategy that takes us from a position where absolute head down response to crisis was what we were dealing with on an everyday basis. You know, absolutely really difficult with that many families and in bed and breakfast, with, you know, the pressures as they were, with, you know, responding to issues far later in our 56 days than you know, than we do now, and the work that has been done in the team to really shift into a more preventative space gives us, I think, the opportunity for the first time, really, genuinely, to think more strategically into a space of prevention and how do we engage with health, and how do, you know, we're far more moving away from that crisis position, and I honestly am incredibly proud of what these guys have achieved.
Yeah, and I would just like to echo my pride at the team. Kelly, Ben, Fraser, Rachel, Paul, everyone. You know, we have just, I'm just the luckiest councillor, I think, out of the 76 in terms of the officers I have. They just make me look so much better than I am. So yeah, I think really, really proud of the work that's already gone on and that will hopefully go on in the future. And yeah, hopefully you'll be calling me back to track the progress, and hopefully I'll be able to say, oh, well, this was a success and this was a success. So yeah.
Thank you. It does feel like a strong strategy, which is coming from a place of calmness, if that makes sense. It feels like it's well formulated, despite the numbers saying that homelessness is increasing. It doesn't seem like it's to say it's not a concern sounds wrong, but it's not concerning and feels like a manageable amount that can be dealt with. And it comes across really well, so thank you for bringing it to us. We have got a recommendation on this for the committee. So this is for Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee to endorse the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy 2026 to 31, consider any further improvements ahead of consideration at Cabinet in May 2026, support the co-production of the delivery plan with people who have lived experience and through a working group of homelessness delivery board members, and to consider how future updates of this area of work might be considered for scrutiny. What I'm going to add to that is that we recommend that Adults Health and Social Care might want to take a look at this. Obviously, they might want to look at it in their forward work planning as a point when maybe the delivery plan, for example, is developed. That might be something they want to take a look at. And also that we bring this back to this committee during the 26 to 31 period to see how it's progressing. So I'll just look for a seconder for that. Perfect. And any dissent from that, or can we take it? Okay, so that's you.
Can you send me that wording?
I can do. Yes. Okay, so thank you very much for coming in. Really appreciate it. And for the rest of us, you don't get to go yet. So item number 10, including item number 6, is our work plan. All this is to consider the latest version of the work plan and to consider the scrutiny request which was made at council, which was the live traffic flooding and infrastructure and resilience for BCP council, moved by Councillor Pete Cooper. I think hopefully you all remember it. What I'm going to actually suggest is we have our work planning meeting on the 1st of April, and that we just take this entire item and plan out our work plan for the remainder of this year at that time, if that sounds good to everyone. Yeah, that seems agreed. The only other thing to update you on is our briefing on the van life piece of work, which we were going to do, which was scheduled for the 18th of March, has been rescheduled to the 15th of April, and that's just to allow a little bit more time for the final bits of evidence to be gathered before we have that meeting. So can I just confirm that everyone's happy with that and happy to take this as part of our work planning? Excellent. Item number 11 is the corporate performance report quarter 2, and this is an audit item, and this is for information only to track the data and see where it's at, so it's not for debate tonight. And on that note, I can close the meeting for this evening. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it as always, and see you at the next meeting, which I don't have the date for, but I'll see you at our work plate.
It's in May.
It's in May, and we've got our work plan 1st of April, so I'll see you all then. Thank you very much, and good night. Good night to everyone watching at home and who's been here today as well. Thank you.